Ukraine has carried out one of the deadliest drone strikes on Russia so far, killing at least 13 people and wounding dozens more, according to Russian officials. The attack targeted the city of Nizhnekamsk in Tatarstan, around 900 kilometers east of Moscow. It's home to one of Russia's most advanced oil refineries. Russian officials say civilian and industrial facilities were hit in the attack. And these are some of the latest pictures we have verified of the strikes. Russian regions have also been targeted overnight by Ukrainian drones. And in Ukraine, officials in Kharkiv say 5 people have been killed in a Russian artillery attack there. Well, let's speak now to our Russia editor, Steve Rosenberg, who's in Moscow, and our Ukraine correspondent, Dan Johnson, in Kyiv. Steve, I'll begin with you. Put this latest drone attack by Ukraine into Russia into context for us, because it has been going after oil facilities, oil refineries a lot in recent days and weeks, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it fits into a pattern. You know, Russians are getting used to waking up to the news that Ukraine has carried out another long-range drone strike deep into Russia. So no real sense of surprise here, although some shock about the death toll. Earlier today, the mayor of Nizhnekamsk said that Ukrainian drones had attacked industrial and civilian targets in the city. He didn't specify what exactly, but we know that there is a big oil refinery in the city. There's also a big petrochemical plant. The one thing that Russian officials have provided details of is casualty figures. They say that at least 13 people have been killed, which makes this, as you mentioned, one of the deadliest Ukrainian drone strikes on Russia so far.
And Dan, what more can you tell us about the Russian attack in Kharkiv?
Yes, that was reported overnight in a small village close to the front line in Ukraine's east. Russian shelling, which hit residential areas there. The regional prosecutor's office says that 5 people were killed and that there is an investigation ongoing to gather evidence there into a potential war crime. It shows you the continued threat that people in the east, close to the front line, are facing, but right across Ukraine as well. There was an air raid alert in the last half an hour here in Kyiv, potentially in response to what Russia suffered last night at the hands of Ukraine's long-range drones.
Yeah, and before I go back to Steve, Dan, what is the strategy, the calculation here on Ukraine's part? Because it can't, as we know at the moment, defend itself from Russian ballistic missiles, but it does have the capability to carry out these drone attacks into Russia. So what message is it trying to send?
Yeah, that long-range drone capacity is something that Ukraine has invested heavily in improving and increasing, and the amount and distance of attacks have ramped up, especially over the last few weeks and months. Ukraine now has the capability to hit targets hundreds of miles into Russia, and it is doing that repeatedly every night. There were hundreds of drones launched last night. The authorities here haven't commented on the civilian deaths that we're hearing from Russia today, but they have confirmed that they struck that oil refinery and that there was an explosion and a fire. The head of Ukraine's unmanned vehicles unit, essentially the drone unit, said that they were still assessing the consequences of that hit. But they consistently denied targeting civilians and said that this was a target carried out with the aim of reducing Russia's military capability.
And Steve, speaking of Russia's military capability, estimates of the number of Russian soldiers or soldiers fighting for Russia killed and injured are well over 1 million since the start of this war. We're also hearing from President Zelensky. He's quoted as saying that Russia is bringing in tens of thousands more troops from North Korea to fight for them. So what is the manpower situation in this war from Russia's perspective?
Well, Russian officials say that there isn't a problem with manpower, that they're able to get people to fight in this war. The figures that you mention are featured outside the country. Inside Russia, no figures are mentioned about the number of dead. Having said that, you know, when you go from town to town, whether it's villages, towns or cities, you can see in the cemeteries many people many recent graves of people who were fighting in Ukraine. So it's clear that a lot of people have been killed in this war. The other thing I'd say is I was watching Russian state television this morning, how they were covering this attack in Nizhny Kamsk. It's quite interesting. It was mentioned briefly, but without any details about what was struck and without any images, any video from the scene. It's like bad news sort of reduced to news in brief. The bulletin was leading with Russian strikes on Ukraine.
And I'll get a brief word from both of you, if you would, Steve, beginning with you, on the thinking in the Kremlin about this war and whether there is any suggestion at all that President Putin would be minded to get involved in talks.
There's no sense at the moment of a change of approach from the Kremlin, no sense of compromise or a desire for compromise, I think. Vladimir Putin seems to think that in this sort of war of attrition, Russia will eventually win. The mood of the people, the mood in the street is slightly different. Most Russians that we speak to would like a negotiated settlement and for this to end.
And a brief thought from you, Dan, if you would, on the Ukrainian perspective on that.
Yeah, Ukraine feels it is on the front foot here. There is still that vulnerability with the lack of Patriot interceptors, meaning that Russian missiles still pose a real threat right across Ukraine. But the conflict is essentially frozen in the east. Ukraine has had some success in pushing the Russians back there. And this strategy of increasingly taking the war into Russian territory is designed to hurt the Kremlin in terms of income, damage Russia's economy, mean that there's less fuel and supplies getting to its military. But it's also designed to make the Russian people feel the impact of this war, to give them a taste of what Ukrainians have lived through for the past 4.5 years. The calculation there is that they can do that without impacting too many civilians in terms of casualties and deaths, without losing essentially the moral high ground that they can say, look, we don't target civilians, that's what Russia does. We're just trying to fight, defend ourselves, have an impact and get ourselves in a strong position so that if we do get to any sort of negotiations in terms of concluding this conflict, we can end it on our terms, not Russia's.
OK, Dan Johnson, our Ukraine correspondent in Kyiv, and Steve Rosenberg, our Russia editor in Moscow. Thank you both very much.